It's the unshifting sand. It's the rock. And so I think the American people understand that instinctively. And the people of Israel understand instinctively that the United States is their best friend.
You mentioned the settlements and that you put a freeze on them for a while, and then you lifted the freeze. And I think, if I'm correct, President Obama wasn't happy that you lifted the freeze. Why did you lift the freeze? Do you have sort of a conflict with President Obama on that? Is the freeze still in play? Does it have any value at all in trying to move peace forward?
Well, you know, the Palestinians put up this precondition, which they never put in for 18 years. They negotiated without demanding settlement freeze. And all of a sudden I came in, they immediately demanded it. So I nearly froze it for a year, 10 months. And 9 months and 1 week into this freeze, they still didn't come. Finally they came and they just said, well, we want another freeze. I said, why don't we just talk about all the issues, settlements being one of them. But let's talk about peace, let's talk about the borders, let's talk about security, let's talk about early warning, let's talk about all the things that we have to do to fashion a workable, stable, and secure peace between us. They wouldn't do it. So I think it's a pretext. I think it's just a way to avoid negotiations. Anyway, I agreed to extend the freeze with President Obama. People don't know that. I agreed another 3 months extension. And he said, and I think wisely, he said, no, it's not worth it. It'll just be the focus again of these disputes instead of getting onto all the core issues that are at the heart of this conflict. That's what needs to be negotiated about.
What can we do to help you? What can the United States do to help you? What, to move this peace forward? Is there anything that you think that we're not doing that we could do? What? Tell me.
Well, I think it's doing it, but I think the most important thing is to tell the Palestinians to quit negotiating about the negotiations and just get on with it. You know, it's like the Nike commercial. Just do it.
But then you've got the problem with the Arab Spring, and you've got President Obama being hit with the fact that, he's backing the rebels in Libya and in Tunisia, and suddenly doesn't want to help the Palestinians. And he said a year ago there'd be a Palestinian state. I mean, that's the problem. We've got.
I think he's actually helping them a lot. I think getting the Palestinians weaned off the idea that they can be the spoiled child of international relations, and they can just avoid negotiations on and on and on, and not be taken into account for that. I don't think that helps the peace process. I think telling them respectfully and firmly to get to the negotiation table is the right thing. It's the right thing because it's true. And sometimes the simplest policy is the right policy and the truest policy.
When we come back, more with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Iran's president wants to wipe Israel off the map. So what would Prime Minister Netanyahu do to stop it? Iran's President Ahmadinejad doesn't just want to wipe Israel off the map. According to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Iran is after us, too, and of course after others. Here's the Prime Minister on the dangers of nuclear arms in the hands of Iran. You mentioned today when you're speaking about Iran, and if Iran goes nuclear in terms of weapons, and that the world shouldn't allow this to happen. How do we stop that?
I think the sanctions are important, but I think the sanctions will only work, economic sanctions, if they're coupled with a clear understanding that there'll be a nuclear or military option against a nuclear program if the sanctions fail. And I think the combination of the two, economic sanctions and the clarity of a military option added to them, will actually stop the Iranian program. It's the only thing that has worked in the last 2 decades. Iran stopped its program only once, in 2003, when it believed for about a year that the United States would take military action against them the way it took against Iraq and Afghanistan.
It's the way that I see it is that your country has the greatest interest in the immediate part because President Ahmadinejad wants to destroy Israel. There's no secret. Do you have the sense that the rest of the world has, although the rest of us should care about nuclear weapons in Iran, do you have the sense that the rest of the world has a sense of urgency about it that we should and that obviously your country has?
Well, I think there is an understanding or an agreement now that didn't exist before on how close the Iranians are getting to this. I think there's an agreement that that's a very, very bad thing for the world. I think there's a greater understanding among security services, but I'm not sure the general public always understands how dangerous it would be if for the first time since the advent of nuclear weapons you'd have atomic bombs in the hands of an apocalyptic sect fervently hating the West, because they might use it. They might threaten to use it. They might give it as an umbrella to terrorists. They might give it to terrorists directly. And they're not just after us. They're after you. We're the small Satan. You're the big Satan. We're just you closer by. But ultimately they have this pathological hatred of the United States and everything that it represents. So a nuclear-armed Iran, I think, would present a real threat of nuclear terrorism for the first time in history. Nobody should let that happen.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you. And thank you, by the way, for visiting the Twin Towers last night.
It was very moving. What also touched my heart was the fact that an Israeli architect actually won the competition and built a tremendous memorial there. And as I was looking at it, I was very touched, but also incensed, because the president of Iran said yesterday at the UN, he implied yesterday that 9/11 was an American plot. You want to have this guy with nuclear weapons?